Welcome to Simply the Bible. Thank you for joining us at our YouTube broadcast. And if you can subscribe to our channel, that would be awesome. Definitely helps us and helps other people to be able to go through the Word with us. We are going through the Gospel of Mark today, continuing in Mark chapter 6. Now, the 12 apostles had returned from their mission with great reports, and they were tired. And so the Lord said, hey, let's go into a quiet, deserted place, come aside by yourselves, and we will rest for a while. Because there were so many people who were coming and going that they didn't even have time to eat. So we pick it up now in Mark chapter 6, verse 32. So they departed to a deserted place in the boat by themselves. Now, if I were one of the disciples on the boat, I would have been so thankful for some R&R. How I personally enjoy my days off. And then to be alone with Jesus, to just hang out. I mean, what could be better than that? But the multitude saw them departing, and many knew him and ran there on foot from all the cities. They arrived before them and came together to him. Now, from Capernaum, it is about 4 miles to the other side of the Sea of Galilee and 10 miles around on foot. And as the people saw Jesus and the disciples in the boat crossing the lake, they were able to outrun them to the other side. And Jesus, when he came out, saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion for them because they were like sheep not having a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things. Now, I don't know how the disciples felt, but I know that I would have been irritated. I mean, I would be thinking, can't they just give us a little time to ourselves? But when Jesus saw them, he was moved with compassion for them because he saw them as sheep without a shepherd. And this was his opportunity to impart to them whatever it was that they need, his grace, his truth. Now, sheep need a shepherd. Left to ourselves, we all get into trouble. We easily make a mess of things. We wander away and are easy prey for the devil, who comes as a roaring lion seeking whom he can devour. How we need our good shepherd, who makes us lie down in green pastures, and he leads us beside still waters. He restores our soul, and he leads us in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. When the day was now far spent, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and already the hour is late. Send them away that they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy themselves bread, for they have nothing to eat." The disciples saw the problem. There were probably 10 to 15,000 people who were hungry. They had no food, and there were no markets nearby. So they would have to travel some distance to get food, and it was already late in the day. This could be disastrous. Now, the disciples were good at assessing the problem, but that was as far as it went. But he answered and said to them, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "Shall we go to buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat?" But he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Now, some people see problems, but they are content to let other people handle it. But Jesus was always proactive. When he saw real needs, he did something to help. He wanted his disciples to walk in his footsteps. They were in an impossible situation, truly. And Jesus knew this, but he wanted his disciples to do something to meet the need. Now, the disciples immediately objected. A denarius was a day's wage, and it would take nearly 200 denarii, or 8 months' salary, to feed so many people. They were good at figuring, but they did not know God's multiplication. We easily see what we don't have, but Jesus wants us to look at what we do have. The lesson is not to judge the situation by our insufficiency, but by God's sufficiency to do his will. The disciples found 5 loaves and 2 small fish. These actually came from a boy. The loaves were made in the form of an oblong or round cake as thick as one's thumb and as large as a plate. The fish were probably salted or maybe dried or roasted. Verse 39. Then he commanded them to make them all sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in ranks, in hundreds and in 50s. And when he had taken the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves, and gave them to his disciples to set before them. And the 2 fish he divided among them all. So they all ate and were filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of fragments and of the fish. Now those who had eaten the loaves were about 5,000 men. This is the only miracle of Jesus that was recorded by all 4 gospel writers. Clearly, it made a huge impression on them. Let us examine the steps in this miracle. First, the Lord prepared for what he would do. Jesus made them sit down in ranks. The Greek word also refers to rows of seed in a garden bed. Jesus arranged them in hundreds and 50s so that there was adequate space between them to be served. Jesus expected a miracle, which is the first step to receiving one. Second, they put all that they had into the Lord's hands, and he multiplied it. This is dedication that leads to multiplication, and it is God's way of growing his work. When we place ourselves and all that we have in his hands, then he multiplies it beyond our imagination. Third, Jesus provided more than enough. We have been invited to dinners where they serve just barely enough, so we went through the McDonald's drive-thru on the way home. But all these people were stuffed. It's the feeling you have after a Thanksgiving meal. And Jesus didn't even stop at that point, but he made such an overage that they had 12 baskets of leftovers. God gives us more than enough so that we can share it with others. My cup runneth over. Verse 45. Immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side to Bethsaida, while he sent the multitude away. Now John tells us that after this miracle, the people wanted to make Jesus king by force. Evidently, they wanted a ruler who would keep them well fed. Jesus did not want his disciples to be infected by this hysteria. They already had enough struggles with their own ambitions and their own ideas of Christ's mission. So Jesus made them get into the boat with orders to go to the other side of the lake. Then he dismissed the multitude. And when he had sent them away, he departed to the mountain to pray. This had been a long day of ministry, a boat trip, teaching, and finally feeding 5,000 men, or 10 to 15,000 people total. Most of us would have figured it was time to just kick back and relax. But Jesus wanted to spend time communing with his Father. He spent almost the entire night in prayer. He did not descend from the mountain to go out to his disciples until the 4th watch of the night, which was 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock in the morning. This is the secret of the Lord's ministry. He spent much time in prayer and relied upon God's power, wisdom, and love. And if we would be powerful in ministry, we should do the same thing. Now, when evening came, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. Then he saw them straining at rowing, for the wind was against them. How often, after a time of great spiritual success, are we then thrust into some spiritual storm? The disciples were just as much in the center of God's will now as they were passing out the loaves and the fishes. You see, God knows that our faith is not strengthened in times of pleasure and ease, but in times of adversity. If it had been smooth sailing, then they would not have learned this next valuable lesson. Now, about the 4th watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea, and would have passed them by. And when they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed it was a ghost and cried out. For they all saw him and were troubled. But immediately he talked with them and said to them, "Be of good cheer, it is I, do not be afraid." When the disciples had strained at the oars long enough, the Lord came to them. Since there was no boat left for Jesus to take, he walked on water. He came beside them to reassure them, but when they saw him, they thought he was a ghost and were terrified. But Jesus said, "Take courage. It is I, do not be afraid." Now, how often does the Lord say these words to us when we are in a storm, but maybe we're not listening? But sometimes he first lets us strain a while at the oars before he comes to our aid. Then he went up into the boat to them, and the wind ceased, and they were greatly amazed in themselves beyond measure and marveled. As soon as Jesus stepped into the boat, the wind ceased. Once again, he proved to them that he was the master over every situation. They were greatly amazed beyond measure, for they had not understood about the loaves because their heart was hardened. There was a lesson in the loaves that Jesus wanted them to understand, but they didn't get it. Their hearts were hardened. Evidently, the Lord's miraculous provision in the loaves and fishes was more than just a large fish feed. It was an object lesson in faith. Jesus was the master of every situation. If he could miraculously multiply food, then he could also control the weather. But their hearts were hard. They saw the opposition before them, but not their omnipotent Lord. They did not need to be afraid. Even though Jesus was not on the boat with them, he was still watching and caring for them. We need to also remember this so that we don't panic in times of trouble. When they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret and anchored there. And when they came out of the boat, immediately the people recognized him, ran through that whole surrounding region, and began to carry about on beds those who were sick to wherever they heard he was. Wherever he entered into villages, cities, or the country, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might just touch the hem of his garment, and as many as touched him were made well. In contrast with the hardness of heart of the disciples, the people reached out in faith just to touch the hem of the Lord's garment, and they all received healing. Do you need physical or spiritual, relational or emotional healing? The specific need is not as important as our faith in simply reaching out to touch Jesus to meet that need. Are you willing to do that? God is fully capable of meeting whatever our need may be. We may lack resources. We may be in a very troubling situation. But will we look to the Lord and make him the one that we call upon in that time of need? Well, God bless you. Thank you for joining us. It's great to have you watching. And if you could subscribe to us, that would be great. We would greatly appreciate it. May God bless you, and may you continue to delight yourself in God's Word.